Hi everyone. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm Lewis Matheson, Associate Director at Rider Levett Bucknall. Today we're going to be discussing climate change readiness, where we'll be asking the panel their views on the current changing climate and how are we preparing our infrastructure for this. So I'll let everyone in the panel give themselves a brief introduction before we kick off.
Hello everyone, my name is Amir H. I'm an architect and CEO and founder of ShortMinds. So I'm glad to be on this panel with everyone, and we'll try to make it as actually communicative and as a discussion more than anything else.
Hello everybody, good afternoon, and please wake up. I'm Engi Jaber. I'm the Associate Partner at Plus Impact and Head of Climatize. We focus mainly on sustainability and environmental consultancy and leading the world towards net zero.
Hi all, I'm Steve Velegrinis. I'm a design director at Gensler, based in Dubai. I am the city's practice area leader for Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa. And a lot of the work we've been doing in the past couple of years has been focused on climate change, adaptation, resilience, regenerative design. So this is a panel very close to my heart.
Hello everyone, I'm Ayah Rahmoun. I'm a graduate engineer currently working at Arab, and I'm truly honored to be on this panel. And I'll be sharing my research. Hopefully one day I can show the projects I've worked with Arab here.
Hi, a very good afternoon. I'm Tushant Suri, Associate Director at MACE. As an organization, we support clients in major programs, establishing their PMOs, program and project delivery, and cost management. And my role spreads across the MENA region, supporting clients with future-ready programs, climate adaptation, resilience, but then also adapting a more holistic approach to sustainability to create that positive impact on the triple bottom line, so people, planet, and profitability.
Hello everyone, Sumit here. I'm CEO for ESGVs. As a company, we are helping companies in a lot of trainings, capacity buildings, sustainability reports, your audits of GHG inventories, waste management, and some of the recent projects that we have done also have included environmental policies for some of the municipalities. So that's what we do. Hope to hear for a very engaging conversations, and let's hope that we do not bore you out just out of lunch. Yeah.
Thank you everyone. It was a very good introduction we were given in terms of some of the issues we are facing. So the first question to go out would be how you feel our cities in the Middle East are shifting from basic climate adaptation to full resilience planning.
I might have a crack at that. I think part of the challenge is that to have seen action now, we have to have started 10 or 15 years ago. And so we're dealing with a lag. And in some ways, we also have to look at the language that we're using. Adaptation really is, okay, we're responding to a problem that we never anticipated. Resilience is sort of being ready for that problem. But actually what we really need to sort of start thinking about is regenerative design, of actually doing something that's not only resilient, but actually improves the ecology and environment that we live in. And that really, it goes to this question of what happens if we stop doing the wrong things today? Will we still have a problem? The answer is yes, we still will. So if we look at something like carbon, we could stop emitting carbon today, which we are nowhere near doing. And we would still have a problem of how do we actually draw down the carbon that's already in the atmosphere? So there is a need for things like negative emissions, positive biodiversity. They're kind of measures that we need to be talking about and are not really yet. Everyone becomes very focused on things that are understandable, like carbon and reduction of emissions. So I would characterize it as saying as we're a bit behind, we're significantly behind, and we're starting to catch up, but there's a lot of work to do.
No, absolutely, and just to top up from what Sima was saying here is, I think there is, besides the lag, I think there is a lack of awareness still of what needs to be done. And we're trying to react to certain aspects, whether when it comes to climate adaptability or mitigation for certain weather events, that becomes like a post-rational decision that, okay, now we need to focus on creating a stormwater network, for example, rather than us could have, prevented the catastrophes that happen and the losses that happened just, was it last year, the year before that, time flies. So I think we should start shifting our minds, and especially when it comes to design, to future resilient predictive scenarios. We need to, we have the technology, it's evolving right now, for us to understand the climate change from whether it's floods, sandstorms, heat waves, etc., for at least the next 50 years, right? So we can start planning ahead. And then I don't think we should stop there.
Yep.
We should then even create kind of three scenarios. First is a baseline that we typically do right now. And then the second one is assuming that at X amount of time. And then another one that allows adaptability and durability of the infrastructure for it to carry out another 50 years on top of that.
Yep.
So I think it needs to have that element of flexibility in design and adaptability.
Yeah, thanks. And that kind of helps me move on to one of the questions I had for Ayah. And what's your thoughts on what's actually been done so far to prepare for climate change related extreme weather events?
Well, there's a lot that's been done already, but honestly, not nearly enough. I think when you look at the scale and speed of climate change, there's much more to be done. There's, across the Middle East, many investments we're currently seeing, early warning systems, major drainage upgrades, and a few projects with climate resilience in mind. But the Dubai municipality actually awarded a 1.5 billion dirhams, I believe, to the Tasrif initiative. It enhances the stormwater management. And, well, we all experienced the Dubai floods last year, and it was something like nothing I've seen before. Usually when there's rain, you just prepare by sealing the doors, taping the windows, but this was completely different. Roads, cars were submerged underwater, public transportation was paused, and communities were lost. They didn't know what to do. Their buildings are old, and the truth is, the buildings are not equipped for the climate of the future. We need to think about retrofitting them, refurbishing them. I'm not saying we should not evolve design and infrastructure, but we do need to look at the buildings of today and see how we can protect it from the climate of tomorrow.
Yep. No, that's a really good point, thank you. And to kind of look on what you were saying before, Stephen, about us being slightly behind, infrastructure prioritization, what's the panel's thoughts on what we should actually be looking to fortify first?
I'll sort of address that, and partly because it's a focus of a lot of our work at the moment. And what we were sort of saying, we see a lot of cities that are catching up, but the responses are often very lumpy. You go to the developing world, and we're doing work in Lagos at the moment. Lagos is a city that's 20-odd million people now, and be 40 million people. It'll be the biggest city in the world before 2050. So you look at the needs of a city like that, and it's really difficult to get them to focus on climate adaptation. What I think we see as a sort of perennial problem everywhere we go are things like sea level rise, and that's often the first thing we look at. Any coastal project, sea level rise sort of predictions, and heat, and everywhere in our region, heat and heat change, particularly in cities. A lot of those problems are not solved by hard infrastructure. It's not solved by green infrastructure. It's looking at how we deploy nature-based solutions more often than not. So, do you build a seawall that inevitably fails, or do you build a series of reefs, mangroves, polder-style landforms as a multi-layered, resilient, growing solution that actually increases biodiversity? So one thing is, what things do we need to address quickly? And they're big issues that I think are well known. And the second question is, how do we address them? And I think there's not yet enough focus on the nature-based solutions.
If I can just add to Steve's point, I think completely agree. On a regional level, there needs to be a major focus and a continued investment in biodiversity and nature-based solutions, because that's what makes the entire puzzle regenerative in nature. You don't want degrading stuff. But having said that, I think on a positive side, at least what we're seeing as an organization is we're seeing a shift in conversations. I think it's yet to translate into actions. We've obviously seen major commitments in Dubai coming around the stormwater network and the Tasreef program. But on a positive side, irrespective, it's the floods that we encountered here last year or the wildfires that we saw in California early this year. The conversation is really moving from what's the cost of doing this to what's the cost of not doing this. And I think that's a very powerful shift that is being realized. So conversations have started, and I think the actions would translate. However, from an infrastructure point of view, again, as Steve outlined, we need to take a more holistic approach to built environment rather than looking at a siloed approach on a district level or infrastructure level or city level. I think it's really understanding how the synergies happen and how can we transition to a purpose-led design. And what that really entails is, I think in Dubai alone, we have one of the largest water bodies or artificial water bodies per square kilometer in the world. There's no reason why there can't be stormwater reservoirs for extreme weathers. We've seen that in the Scandinavia. We've seen best practices happening in Japan now around sea level rise. Technology exists. It's just bringing that best practice on a regional level and making everything more purpose-led. Rather than looking great, or in addition to looking great.
Also, Lewis, I'd just like to add here. So one thing is cities will have these challenges, like storms would happen. So what we also now need to think is like how cities can be more adaptive. So when we are talking about adaptive cities, you need to think about, let's say if these things happens, what people need. People need utilities, right? So your water, your energy, your infrastructure, your Wi-Fi's, all those things, they becomes really important because your business needs to keep on running. The panic need not to spread, so utilities becomes an important part. What about healthcare? So your healthcare facilities, they need to be running. If people need to access those healthcare facilities, your transport needs to be running. So like what we also understand is these floods came and few of the metro stations were affected, right? So that suddenly talks about redesigning our infrastructure, assuming that these realities are there. So as just while starting this panel, and I always say that, it's not probability of extreme events, it's certainty that these extreme events will occur. So cities needs to adapt from that perspective.
Yep. And when we were talking about investment earlier, what I'd be quite interested to know the opinions of where we should actually be looking at that, if we should be looking at retrofitting, or if we should be putting that investment into new resilient developments.
I think what we were talking about initially before we started the panel is the design needs to shift from being more reactive to situations that we thought would never happen, and it actually did, into an actual proactive approach in making sure that existing buildings are safe. Like Sumit was saying, that we've had an incident last year where a healthcare facility got flooded, and it was in a remote area actually serving a certain population. So what do people do at that time? And building a system that is sustainable and resilient does not mean that we have only a storm water network, as an example. It actually means that what happens if this system actually fails? Stephen was saying that, yes, we do have a system in place as part of our infrastructure planning or part of our resilient or approach to mitigation to some of the issues that might happen. But what happens if that system fails? We need to have backup solutions that allows people, or at least allow the critical aspects of life like healthcare, transportation, electric substations, to be able to support the infrastructure and support the people that are within these communities. And I think this makes a different perspective that we need to look at, not designing a system that would actually support an incident, but having backup plans for this system to actually work. Like Engi was saying, we do have simulation softwares. We do have options that we can plan different incidents that will take place. It doesn't really need to happen. Being proactive means that we can anticipate and have backup solutions for our initial solutions as well. This is what makes us more successful and resilient in the future, because we cannot predict, but we can simulate.
Yeah, and just also to add to that, as Ayah also pointed out, retrofitting is actually a key element, to sustaining and future-proofing operations, if you want to call it, of life. And I say that because the percentages of old buildings, let's say, or old infrastructure, as compared to the new ones, it's still higher. So if we discard it, or if we don't give that importance, then we're just literally shooting ourselves in the foot. So we really need to upgrade the whole system. And rather than creating new systems, perhaps that upgrade contains the expansion that's needed for the future demand, as well as the current demand, obviously. Another point is, I think when we look at infrastructure, whether it's energy, water, transport, or even green infrastructure in general, I think there's another gap here where we only focus on those critical infrastructure, but we don't focus on that quality of life infrastructure. So when we talk about microclimate and the importance of microclimate designs, it's not just about that moment of time. Like, I hear it a lot from developers now bragging about, yes, our community is 5 degrees lower than our neighbors, which is great, good for you, but it's 5 degrees relevant to what exactly? Like, are you talking about it from as compared to historical data? Are you comparing it to the future scenarios? Obviously, you will always be 5 degrees lower than your neighbor, but just show of hands, who here thinks that walking outside in 40 degrees is comfortable? No. And that is what people are designing for, saying that, yes, we've done you a beautiful microclimatic design that is able to enhance, outdoor thermal comfort at 40 degrees. Like, seriously? So I think we need to start first addressing, benchmark, what is it that we are looking to achieve, and then create the strategies and actions and ultimately implementing and delivering to achieve those benchmarks in the future. Think of it as a whole life cycle design approach, not just on materials, but actual design process that it's endless in time as well until the end of life of that community. And then connect the whole city planners with the master developers, with the urban planners, with X, Y, and Z of design teams to actually create a resilient city and sub-communities within that city. You cannot work in silo. You cannot just say one community and not the other. It has to be everybody.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that. It's the old maxim. The greenest building you can ever build is the one you don't build. If you reuse buildings, you're avoiding enormous amounts of emissions, right? I was at an event recently where the speaker was asking people, how much of Dubai's landfill do you think is filled with construction and demolition waste? The answer is 70%. 70% of landfill in Dubai is construction and demolition waste, which is wasted carbon, wasted materials. We cannot ignore retrofitting. It is absolutely essential. It's also the places where we live, right? These are chances to change quality of life for everyone who lives in the place. You can't simply rely on a project that's going to take 20 years to reach full delivery to start addressing the problem. It needs to be multidimensional without question.
This is a great approach. When we talk about resilience and we talked about adaptability, I think we need to talk about human comfort. Like you were saying, there are no benchmarks. We brag about 5 degrees out of 55, but it doesn't actually address the quality of life that we're talking about. So I think wellness design and human-centered approach in actual benchmarking would make a big difference, especially even in existing buildings. It doesn't really have to be new developments, but we have a huge population, like you said, that are living in older communities. Those are a big impact on the community itself. Go ahead.
It's just that when you talk about the old communities and acting now, Engi and I, we were speaking about this. We were talking about how there's much talk and not much done. There's been so much improvement currently, but not quite enough. And we've seen so many, let's say from CUP 2018, we've seen a couple of improvements, but not significant enough to say, we're good, we can, take a break. But in terms of older cities, if I may bring an example, so Seattle in the US, they had a problem with drainage and chronic flooding. They elevated the street level. You can even now go do an underground tour. The old storefronts are there, everything is there. But is this the solution now if we look at a historical adaptation? Or is there technology now that we can look forward to help save coastal cities? There's New York, there's Venice. Jakarta's just moving its city to another island. So where does the answer lie? In history, preventative, proactive?
I think we're blessed being in Dubai. We're relatively new, so
Yeah.
we have actually a chance to make an impact. And if we put our thoughts together and we try to actually look at it from a proactive type of approach, I think we're probably going to be in a safer place.
100% agree with that. I think the thing that we have here that very few other places in the world have are leaders with a very strong vision who make clear decisions and put the financial means behind it, and they're not governments that change very often. And so I'm Australian. There was a period of time where there was, I think, 7 prime ministers in 5 years. How does any system make a long-term plan in that scenario? So to your point, I think we're in a perfect position to do that. We don't have to say, well, let's make a climate plan. All of the countries of the region have a net zero strategy. Most of the developers that we work with are government linked. And so you say to them, hey, there's a national strategy. And they say, oh, okay, we'll do our bit. So there's limitations to that. There are still those things that people say, well, that's not our job, that's the government's job. And so when we're talking to people about sea level rise on a coastal site, sometimes we have to sort of say, well, no, it's not a government will fix it problem. You have to address this. Here's how you can address it. And when something that's become pivotal in the work we've been doing recently is climate finance. Yeah. And sort of saying, you can do this, and yes, we understand it's a cost to your project, but here's how you actually address that cost. That's got to be part of this solution as well. Let's not kid ourselves. We're working for people who are there to make money. If we don't come up with a solution that helps them continue to make money, we won't have a job for much longer.
Or losing money. Because again, you need to present, and that's why we were discussing this earlier, is there is a cost for inaction, and there is, and everybody's worried about, that dollar in the pocket. Why should I go ahead and make a significant green investment? I think that in the previous presentation, Brad was talking about, the green financing, the ESG-related goals, the sustainability-linked things. But I think the question lies is, first, how are we measuring it? It's great that there's green financing, but what are the KPIs that are actually linked to it? And that needs to shift from just a prescriptive number to an actual performance-based approach as well. Yeah. And I think, again, future resiliency should be part of that criteria, that you're not just accommodating for infrastructure as of today, but you are actually adapting for peak events, not necessarily even future events, but Saudi Arabia, they have the FIFA coming up, but with it, they have other, major events that are taking place across the city of Riyadh. How are they going to accommodate those people in terms of housing, in terms of transportation, in terms of, just the provision of food and water? Like, you remember in Egypt at the COP when everybody was complaining there's no food for people to eat. So it's, again, because they couldn't accommodate they're not equipped to deal with that number of population within a certain area. So we need to start thinking of those scenarios within our plan. We don't just plan for the population that you estimated for in your design, but rather think of those, surges, those off-peak that just come out of nowhere because of certain events, and with it, those climate events. What are the probability, and put a factor for that as part of your design.
If I could just add to that, I think I completely echo what's being discussed. I think we're in a very grateful part of the world where we experienced floods, and within 6 weeks, I think $8 billion of investment was committed to make the city more adaptive to events of this nature. I think if we just look at what's happened in the other parts of the world and what levers have worked, I think a very powerful lever has been the regulators. And it's not about defining codes and revising codes, no. It's about what Engi said, creating a level playing field on reporting and disclosure. So what's worked really well in, for example, Europe and the UK was mandating something called TCFD. It's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So mandating organizations to disclose the financial risk associated with climate change, which then takes into account extreme events, sea level rise, etc. And how that starts playing on organizations is, when we talk about cost, it's a very CapEx-driven decision-making as we speak. Where that moves the conversation is whole life cycle cost. And that's CapEx, that's OpEx, that's your asset valuation that gets accounted on your P&Ls. It's the insurance premiums of the assets. So it really broadens that really concept of cost and commercial viability, which is key for every development. If there are no projects and if there are no developments because of commercial viability, then it's a bigger problem. So whatever we do needs to be commercially viable, but it's just how you define the cost and how you define viability. The regulatory lever on reporting really helps you move that and define that. So I think what would be helpful is to see how the regulation evolves, not on codes, but on reportings and disclosures in this part of the world.
I think part of what made a little bit of an impact recently is the use of actual measures that would help in the resiliency as a design aspect. So like you said, when we talk about mangroves as an example, this can be an architectural feature that people would actually enjoy. So it doesn't really always have to be an investment that you cannot use. We need, as designers, to look at solutions that would be usable for, or be not usable, maybe be attractive to developers. So they would buy into it because they know that there is a return on investment other than only making it as a measure of protection. On the longer project life cycle, you definitely will get return on investment on that. But when we treat those elements as design aspects or an attraction aspect, then it makes our projects actually much more attractive as well.
It's a really good point, and it's kind of more verging into sort of green building here, but what sort of other, obviously you mentioned mangroves, what other sort of design elements does the panel think you could incorporate to actually have, is adding value as well as helping with the future proof of it?
So let me take this up. So briefly our discussion is moving from cities to corporate level sustainability to also people level. So first of all, if we're talking about cities level, I think we have talked about mangroves. Another important part can be green buffers. These green buffers can be utilized for the stormwater drainage as well. You have storms, these green buffers can be used. They can be utilized for urban heat islanding. But then again, you're talking about a city level planning, creating certain buffer zones altogether. So that is one aspect to it. And talking about, so and like, for example, in Netherlands, what these guys did was they made the river basin wider, gave more area for it, gave more embankment for it, also put across some give these rivers more space basically so that they are less susceptible to these climate disasters. What can be done for something like Dubai? We have a coastline, so mangroves definitely is a solution. Can we utilize some kind of dunes near the coastlines? That can be a design feature. Definitely, some small solutions I've seen, they're already in place. People are using these mechanical embankments, which can be used as walkways near the cities. So there are solutions, but which all solutions will fall into a category of a government intervention or a city level planning, versus which all will fall under the organization level planning. So for organizations, I think we have talked about TCFD slightly, but I think one of the most important tool, which I talk about for every organization that they should do is, they should estimate their climate risk, at least for the asset level. What is a high probability that, let's say, the asset that you have, it is flooded, your complete operation is halted for 3 months, and whatever you have forecasted is gone, right? So do a climate risk at whatever the reporting you do, that's an okay part, but at least do a climate risk as a part of your business continuity planning. That will also help your organization become more resilient, and that will also reflect upon that which cities you want to be in. So that is possibly the organization level sustainability perspective. One more thing which possibly could help when we are looking at putting all these perspectives is some kind of incentivization by the people who are looking at these assets. You're looking at a building, try analyzing whether it is a green building, how the energy bills are there, what kind of the flood resistance features are there. That will automatically promote and possibly give a higher premium on these projects. Because once a flood happens, these are the projects that will save the society, right? So we are talking about how developer needs to put those more projects, but that also comes from a lot of demand. So on the demand side, that also is something that public can look at. And for that, a lot of awareness is something that is missing. And if people can be more aware about how these buildings will be impacted during, let's say, during heat or during a flood or during any other climate disaster, that is something that would really help becoming the complete infrastructure more resilient.
I might add to that, just a perspective. For me, it's never about a single application of a technology, a thing. But what we look at it as is designing systems of systems and thinking in circular terms. And I'll give a practical example because that's a little bit sort of jargonish. We were working with a developer who wanted to develop an industrial zone and a port on the Mediterranean coast of North Africa. What was fortunate was that, and you were mentioning the task force disclosures, the legislation in Europe recently came in, and when we looked at, well, where are your exports from this port going? They're going to Europe. Right, well, you can't export petrochemicals, you can't export dirty steel, you can't export petrochemical products. Has to be green products. Great, okay, so the industrial idea was, well, we have everything powered by renewable energy. That allows us to do things like green hydrogen. That allows us to do things like green steel, which are exceptionally valuable, increased value sort of exports. We looked at the site and said, guys, do you realise that 60% of your site, which was a 12 square kilometre site, 60% of your site's below 2 metres above sea level. This is what end of century looks like for your site. Clearly, they were a little bit taken aback by that. But it was like, okay, so how do we fix that problem to take advantage of that sort of economic system that we're talking about? And so we looked at, well, how can we use models like the polder model in the Netherlands of sea level rise protection? And that can also be sort of wrapped into a green finance strategy that funds the renewable energy, your green industries, and these interventions. Oh, and by the way, you've got salt marshes on your site. They are the second most potent carbon fixing landscape in the area? And what about if we use that as a stormwater system? So it was in actually combining all of those things that became powerful and was a really, really economically convincing solution. So it's got to be, we've got to think about all of the things we do as interconnected systems and how they can feed off one another to take advantage of things like green finance. And that changes drastically from one site to the next. So, you know, we're working in tropical parts of the world, arid parts of the world, you know, Asia, Africa, Middle East. It's never the same solution working the same way in the same place.
Thank you.
Huge round of applause. What a wonderful panel. Thank you very much, Lewis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.